Welcome to Financial Counseling Unit 3, Conducting Income Analysis. What we're going to talk about in this section is the purpose. We're going to talk about the types of income sources, the way you calculate income. Ooh, fun. We're going to talk about how you verify and document income. And then we're going to wrap up with barriers to generating income. So why is it important? Why is income analysis important, you think? The reasons we've come up with are for budgeting and personal cash flow, because people need to know where they're spending their money. And then also for any kind of public subsidy or assistance program qualifying. And then, of course, for loan qualifying and affordability, if they ever want to buy a house or if they want to see how much car they can afford, they'll need to know how to do, or you'll need to know how to do an income analysis with them. And ideally, what you want to do is be able to share this information with them so they'll be able to carry it on. All right. Other things we want to consider are determining the client's financial goals. So that's something we need to know as we're doing our analysis, because it can be different. Identify all the client's income sources and earning capacity. Acknowledge income-related barriers. Oftentimes people don't realize that certain things are barriers to them earning more money. So you want to make sure that at least you're making them aware of that. Understanding subsidy programs and guidelines. Bank or creditor qualifications, that sort of thing, and then of course gathering necessary reporting information. All these are things that we have to consider when we're doing income analysis. So now let's start with budgeting and personal cash flow, because this is where it all begins. You're going to calculate their annual income, reduce it to a monthly amount, and then use their net amount or their take-home pay. So before, when you calculate their annual income, reduce it to a monthly amount, you're getting their gross pay. What they take home is called their net pay. For those of you who may not know that, I know I used to always have a challenge remembering which was which. So net is take home, gross is what they get before deductions. So note here, you want to review payroll deductions as well, because there may be a loan on there, there may be a 401k, there may be an error that they just haven't noticed. So you want to make sure you review that. Also, payroll deductions can show child support, so you want to know that as well. All right, subsidy and public assistance programs. Obviously, that's a definite reason why you want to be able to do an income analysis. You want to understand what the guidelines are for the different programs that they're looking for. Do you have to know everything there is to know about them? No. But you do need to have a basic idea of what their qualifying guidelines are. One of those is income limits. HUD has area median income limits. The Department of Health and Human Services, National Poverty Guidelines, you want to know that. You also want to know what their annual household income is. If they're looking to buy a home, depending on where their funding is coming from, they may look at household income. So that's important. You'll want the gross income of all household members. And the program guidelines vary program to program, so you want to check with that program's administrator. And the nice thing is most agencies are happy to share that information with you, and even if it's something that you read through the flyer, it's still not making sense, you can call and make an appointment, sit down, go over it with them. You know, let them know you're a housing counselor and you're here to help, and they are usually more than happy to work with you on that. They may even have an outreach person who can come to your office and do a training with your whole staff, which would be really nice. And then what sources need to be verified. That's also very important, because you'll need to know what this particular or that particular subsidy program, what documents they're going to need for verification. Other poverty guidelines, Head Start, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also known as SNAP, which used to be the federal food stamp program, National School Lunch Program, Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program, LIHEAP, CHIP, Children's Health Insurance Program, and then Women's Infant and Children, WIC. So not all federal public assistance programs use poverty guidelines for eligibility, but you still want to know that, and you want to know which each one uses. So best practice, set up a spreadsheet with a list of each one with it on there just for your reference. There are also websites you can go to. You can put your client's information in, and it'll tell you what resources are available. So that's always nice when you can have that technology. But it's good just to know, because you may be doing some outreach in the community and someone may ask you a question. So you want to have an idea of the basic guidelines. Subsidies that use area median income, such as home funds, CDBG, which is also Community Development Block Grant money, Section 8, and public housing, all use area median income. And then there are some affordable home ownership and rental programs that you want to be mindful of. So now let's talk a little bit about, loan qualification and affordability. So if we're looking to get a loan, it's going to be a little different than just looking to see, but for budget purposes. Budget and cash flow is going to be different from loan qualification and affordability. Loan qualification is looking at gross income versus net. Do you remember what I said gross income was? It's before deductions. That's right. All right, so let's go on. The sources are analyzed and then divided by 12 because we want to get a monthly income. And of course, that income has to be verified. And keep in mind that depending on where they're getting a loan, they may not include tips, cash bonuses, or overtime. And the main reason for that is because it's not guaranteed income. And we always see the argument, well, no income is guaranteed income. Well, that's true, but if you're in a job, you've been hired to do work at, X number of dollars per hour for full-time or part-time, whatever the time you've been promised or at least led to believe, then usually that's what it is. Tips are considered extra. Now, oftentimes, if you've got a history, at least 2 years of bringing in tips, bonus, or overtime, then you can make a case for it being counted. But if it's less than 2 years of you receiving it and it's not a salary or a set hourly wage income source, then more than likely, at least for housing purposes, they won't count it. Now, they may count it for, let's say, if you have a state housing finance agency and they're looking at household income, then they may count that extra income. So it's kind of like you have to know where you're going with it. And once you do this, if you haven't done this already, once you do this a while, it'll become second nature, I promise. But initially when you're starting out, you're like, okay, do I need household income? Do I need personal income? So it's going to be what you're analyzing that income for. If income varies, 1 to 2 years worth of documentation may be needed. And then income must be consistent with the likelihood of continuation, 2 years plus. And we'll talk more about that when we get to sources of income. Lenders set their own guidelines within federal regulations. And let me give you an example of that. You may have an FHA loan that says they have to put 3.5% down. There may be a minimum of a 580 credit score. A lender may decide, well, no, we're going to be a little more conservative. So we'll only, they have to have a 630 credit score for us or a 640. And for a long time, FHA didn't have a credit score minimum. And so lenders could go as low as they wanted, or many were conservative and didn't. What I'm seeing these days is a 620 is kind of the norm. And I'd have to double check to see if FHA still has that minimum. It had gone to 580 at one point. But you want to check and just make sure that you know that. So you should be familiar with the lender programs. Do the same thing as you did with the subsidy programs. Keep a spreadsheet. This bank offers this program with this down payment, this credit score requirement, X amount of dollars in reserves. We don't hear that so much these days, but if they're going a conventional route, they may need reserves. And that just means how many months payments they have extra in the bank when they close. So they may say 2 months reserve. So once they close, they need to have at least 2 months payments in the bank already. Determine the client's eligibility and ability to meet debt obligations. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So you want to make sure that the person can afford the house. And they use 2 sets of ratios when they're looking at that, the housing ratio and the debt ratio. So you want to make sure you know those. If it's not for a loan and it's for, or a housing loan is for something else, then just know what their qualifying ratios are for debt. Conduct a projected budget analysis to determine affordability. Absolutely. So even though you're looking at gross income for lender qualifications, you as a housing counselor still want to look at affordability because you've got a little more information than a lender would have. So you want to make sure that even though the lender says yes, they can afford it, you want to make sure that they actually can. And you're going to be going by net income. So here's a good side-by-side to give you an idea of what the lender is looking for in qualifying and what you as a counselor should be looking for in affordability. So the lender's looking at gross income, you're looking at net. The lender's looking at debts on the credit report, and you're looking at actual payments. So not just credit report debts, but all expenses. The lender's looking for other debts as listed on the credit application, such as child support, alimony, separate maintenance. So are you. And then all other household expenses are really not considered, whereas in affordability you will as a counselor. You're going to be looking at child care, for example. You're going to be looking at, let's see, utilities. You're going to be looking at transportation costs, all those sorts of things you're going to be considering. And let's look at this example. A lender may look at, let's say they're making $60,000 a year, which comes out to $5,000 a month gross. Maybe they're only bringing home $3,500. They could have a 401k. It could be a single person, so their taxes are a little bit high, etc. So the lender says, all right, well, you can qualify for 31% of your gross monthly income, which is $1,550 a month. So you put that number in so you can see where they're going to be at the end of the day. The lender says, all right, the debt payments for the credit report, from the credit report are $125, and then they pay child support of $100. So they should have left over after the house payment and all the other debts, $3,225. On your side as a housing counselor, your actual debt payments show $200. Because maybe they're paying part of child care in addition to child support. So you still have the child support, but this is going to be a little bit higher. And maybe their other household expenses come to $1,600. They may have bought a car at a local car lot where they paid a big down payment and are just paying it monthly, and it doesn't show up on the credit report. So who knows what these other things are, but you show they only have $50 left. So you see, maybe a $1,550 payment isn't as comfortable as it looks to the lender. They make because of these other expenses that you will have access to that maybe the lender does not. Make sense? All right, let's talk about types of income sources. So what are some different types of income sources? Well, we've got salary and wages. So that's, you get a job making $60,000 a year, that's your salary. Or you get a job making $30 an hour, 40 hours a week, that's your wage. You may be self-employed. You may be an independent contractor. You may receive alimony or child support. You may have some sort of residual or sporadic income. You may receive public assistance income, disability or Social Security income, retirement or pension, or maybe you have members of your household who contribute monthly. So that's part of your income. Let's look at salary and wages. You want to identify the rate and the frequency of that payment. So how much they make and how often do they get it. You then want to look at any deductions on the pay stubs. Make sure to make a note of any bonus or overtime income and whether or not it's likely to continue. And remember, we said that likelihood of continuation needs to be 2 years or more. Most employers are not likely going to write a letter saying that they're going to get overtime consistently for the next 2 years. So What you have to do in order to be able to count that over time is at least show that they've received it for at least 2 years. And again, it's up to the lender if they want to accept that. I would start with just their base salary and wage, and then review their employment history for stability. Have they just started this job, or have they been in this job for 2, 3, 4 years now? So that's going to be important too. If they've done a career change and they're in a new job, let's say in sales, more than likely you'll need at least 2-year history in this new job to count the income. And the main reason for that is sales isn't a fixed rate. Sales fluctuates, so in order to get an accurate idea of how much money they'll make, they'll need to see a 2-year history. All right, self-employment. That's fun. That can be variable and unpredictable, but it is necessary to analyze the income over a few years with self-employment. Usually 2 is what they'll ask for. Depending on the circumstance and the lender, they may go to 3, but 2 is the standard. And the income is derived from the net profit or loss, and that's going to be on your Schedule C. Businesses' itemized deductions can artificially lower net income and hinder loan eligibility. Conversely, a lower net income may qualify clients for programs with income limits. And let me explain what I mean by artificially lower. Self-employed people are allowed to take quite a few deductions because they're self-employed, so they can write off a lot of their expenses. Well, when they do that, that number is being subtracted from their income so that it can lower their tax rate, which is a benefit, but it kind of is a double-edged sword when it comes to qualifying for a loan, because then it shows your income is less and you may not qualify for what you want to. If you're new to working with self-employed income, I recommend that you Google self-employment cash flow analysis. There are a few out there by the mortgage insurance companies. I looked at one from Radian right before recording this, and it makes it really easy for you to calculate their income, because there are certain things you can add back in, like depreciation, things like that you can add back in and help boost their income. So you want to at least have a link to that on your desktops if you deal with a lot of self-employed people. Otherwise, you can just Google that whenever you need it. So they may need special consideration for budget analysis, because it's going to be a little bit more challenging, because self-employed people are almost the opposite of wage earner people, because self-employed people bring in their gross money. That's the cash flow that they have. And then you've got to see what you really have to work with in terms of affordability. There's 1099 income. Those are usually consultants, contractors. Taxes aren't taken out of their income, so they pay their taxes annually, sometimes biannually or quarterly. It's variable and unpredictable, so again, you'll need to look at several years. They'll also do itemized business deductions, which can artificially lower net and hinder loan eligibility. And like self-employment, the lower net may qualify them for programs, so you'll need to take a look at that as well. Another type of income, like we said, is alimony and child support. And you want to look at the after-tax amount, verify the frequency, as well as the length of time remaining. Now, why do you think that's important? Because if you've got a child support for a child who's 17 years old, they're probably not going to be getting child support much longer. Conversely, if you have child support for a child that's 2, then the person is going to be getting that income for quite a while. So that's why you want to look at time remaining. A lender will not count in that income for child support or alimony if, well, child support particularly, if it's not going to continue much longer. And you'll need verification from a court order, a divorce decree. Oftentimes they'll want to see a bank statement to show that they've been receiving it, because someone can get a court order child support and the parent who's supposed to be paying it may have lost their job. So then they're not paying it. So then you can't count that as income from your client because they're not getting it. So hopefully that makes sense to you. All right, there's residual and sporadic income. That type of income is usually non-traditional, made in cash. It's actually illegal if it's not reported, so it's supposed to be reported. It's okay for budget analysis, but not for credit qualifying. And it depends on what type of residual income it is. If you're getting paid in cash, let's say you've got a client who cleans homes on the side, but she files her taxes for that. She files as a self-employed person, then you can count that for credit qualifying. Multi-level marketing or direct sales may or may not be included depending on the amount and frequency. Usually if the lender sees that there's some additional deposits coming in, you're going to have to explain it. So it's better to just go ahead and see if you can document it, just so you don't look like you're misrepresenting your client. Note it says may be legitimate or predatory in nature, so counselors should definitely discuss in depth. So you want to make sure, especially if you're working with immigrant communities, if they're getting paid in cash, they're getting paid a fair wage, because that's how it can be predatory. So be mindful of that. Public assistance and subsidies can be considered income. If you've got a single mom or a single dad and they've got a child, oh, this looks like we accidentally, sorry about that. If you've got a single mom or a single dad and let's see, and they're getting what am I trying to say, SNAP benefits, that's offsetting their food costs, that's considered income because that's money they're not having to pay for food. It may be administered at federal, state, or county level. Important for counselor to review award letters for approved uses, income limits, length of benefit, that sort of thing. Critical to establish a replacement monetary value to avoid cliff effect. And we'll talk a little bit more towards the end about the cliff effect. But yeah, you definitely want to make sure if they're receiving a voucher, especially like Section 8, that's a really good example because they may get Section 8 for home ownership even, which a lot of lenders didn't like doing because they had to every year make sure that they qualified for it. So if they made too much money, guess what? The Section 8's gone. So that voucher the lender was counting is no longer there. So you can see why lenders are a little, antsy and not really wanting to do that program. But there were a few who stepped out, or stepped up, I should say. And then there's some other forms of public assistance, such as tax credits, child tax credits, Medicaid, Medicare, CHIP, some child care subsidies that can be counted as income, the Low Income Energy Assistance Program, SNAP, like I said, Section 8, like we talked about, WIC, and SSDI. And then other forms of income could be disability insurance, retirement, pension, which we see quite a bit, Social Security, and then, like mentioned earlier, other household members may be contributing. So if you want to see types of income, or if you want to just refer back to it, it's going to be on page 42 through 47 of your book. Now, let's talk about calculating the income. We're getting to the fun part, the math. So I like math. I know everybody doesn't, so I will say this. You can always rewind and back up and play again. Anything that you don't get the first time. A downside I know I have is because I like it and I've done this for a long time, I tend to go rather quickly. So I will try to slow down, make sure that you understand what I'm saying, and not throw you for a loop. So with regards to gathering data, what we want to look at is the source. We want to look at the amount, the frequency, the consistency, the verification methods, and then the program guidelines. We're going to start, I think I went too far, by calculating the annual income, and then we're going to look at sources and types that may be included in calculating the annual income. We're going to determine whether to use gross or net based on the purpose of the type of income. So let's determine frequency of payments. Let's say your client tells you they get paid once a month. So then you're just going to multiply that monthly rate by 12 to get their annual income. Make sense? Now let's say they tell you they get paid semi-monthly. Semi-monthly is twice a month. So they may get paid the 1st and the 15th, or the 15th and the 31st, etc. So that's twice a month. So you're going to take that $1,550 and multiply it by 24. That gives you $37,200. So quite a bit of a difference between those two. Now let's say they tell you they get paid bi-weekly. That means they get paid every 2 weeks. So if they get paid every 2 weeks, with 52 weeks in a year, then that's 26 payments. Do you see how we did that? 52 weeks in a year divided by 2, because they get paid every 2 weeks, is 26 payments. So when we multiply that by the amount they get paid, that comes out to $40,300. So it's very important to know if they're semi-monthly or bi-weekly. And some people say, oh, I get paid twice a month, and they actually mean bi-weekly. So you need to look at their pay stub. If you see a first, a 15, or a 15 and a 30, more than likely it's semi-monthly. If you see odd dates like the 9th, the 23rd, stuff like that, then it's probably bi-weekly. But just ask, is it every 2 weeks or is it twice a month? That's going to be a very important question to ask. And then, of course, if they get paid hourly, you just take the hourly rate, multiply it by the number of hours per week they work, and then by 52 weeks in a year to give you the yearly rate. And what's important by that is most people say, oh, I work full-time, and we make the assumption that that's 40 hours a week. But with some employers, full-time may be 37, 37.5, 38. It can vary. So you want to ask, how many hours do you work a week? And look at the pay stub. Make sure it supports that. So now let's do some practice. And I'm going to grab my calculator here right along with you and see if we can add this up. John earns $12.50 on a bi-weekly basis. What is his gross annual income? So I'm going to give you a second to try to go ahead and do that. All right, let's see what you got. $12.50 times 26 equals $32.5. Great, I'm sure you got that. All right, now what is his gross monthly? You just take that annual divided by 12. So he makes $27.08, and I rounded up for this example. All right, let's move on to the next one. Don't forget, if you didn't quite get it, you can back this up. Mary earns $12.50 on a semi-monthly basis. What is her gross annual income? And I'll give you a minute to go through that. So semi-monthly, we said, is twice a month. So they're going to get 24 paychecks. 2 times 12 is 24. And we take that, multiply it by $12.50, which is how much she makes each pay period. And she gets $30,000. Now, what is her gross monthly income? So you know you're just going to take that annual and divide by 12, right? That gives us $2,500 a month. So look at that difference, $30,000, $2,500 for Mary for semi-monthly. Let's go back just a second. Where John making the same $12.50, but he's getting it every 2 weeks. He's getting $32.5 and $27.08. So he's getting $2,500 more than merry because he's paid bi-weekly versus semi-monthly. And that makes a big difference when you're looking at qualifying for programs. You don't want to calculate that incorrectly. All right, another one. Peter earns $12.50 an hour and works 37 hours per week. What is his gross annual income? So you want to take the $12.50, multiply it by 37, and then what? Multiply it by 52. Exactly. And that should give you $24,050. So now what is his gross monthly? And that I know you can get by now, so we'll go ahead and move forward. $24,050 divided by 12 is $2,004 a month. Now, here's where the fun comes. Calculating seasonal income. And depending on where you are, you may be in an area where you rarely get seasonal income people. And that's fine. But if you do see seasonal income people, you want to know. And you also just want to know in case you get that one off and you're not freaking out going, oh my God, I don't know how to calculate this. The biggest thing for seasonal is making sure you calculate the weeks right. And there's an easy formula to do it here in step 2. But we're going to start with step 1 so you can see the flow of the whole process. So you've got a client, they work 9 months a year, they make $500 a week. First, you got to break that weekly rate into a monthly rate because as we know, some months have 5 weeks and some months have 4 weeks. So we can't just do 4 because it's not going to come out right. In any program you might be qualifying them for, they're going to break it down per week and calculate it properly. Now, if you have one of those calendars that shows what number, of weeks in the month, and you go, like if they tell you I work January 1st to, August 30th, you can go through and say, okay, well, that's the 36th week. And then you know for sure it's 36 weeks. But otherwise, this is really the easy way to do it. And if you show any underwriter that this is how you calculated it, usually they will accept it. So you want to take 52 weeks and divide by 12, and that gives you 4.33 average weeks per month. And you take that 4.33 and you multiply it by the number of months worked, which in this case is 9, and that gives you 38.97 weeks. You multiply that by the weekly rate of 500, and you get $19,485 per year. Again, if this is not something that's going to stick in your head, go ahead and do a screen print right now and save it so that you'll have it for later. All right, now let's practice this one. Jean earns $600 per week, and she works 10 months out of the year. So what is her gross annual income? And I'll give you a minute to work on that. If I didn't give you enough time, go ahead and pause it, but I want to go ahead and move forward. So remember, 52 weeks divided by 12 months gives us an average 4.33 weeks per month. We take that and multiply it by 10 months out of the year. That gives us 43.3 weeks worked that particular year. And then we multiply it by how much she makes per week. So she made $25,980 working 10 months. Now, what's her gross monthly income? Well, we do like we did on all the others. We take that and divide it by 12. So $21.65 a month is what she's making. So this is called annualizing out her income, because based on this number, we can now compare her to someone who's working a regular 12 months out of the year. She makes $21.65. But in actuality, we know she makes, what is it? If you take 10 months times $21.65 would be, my mind is slow, $21,650 if she only worked 10 months at that rate. So this gives her a more accurate annual rate of $25,980 for the 12. And I might have just totally confused you there, so disregard that last little bit if I threw you off. But it just helps us compare apples to apples by annualizing it out that way. All right, so calculating self-employment income. And like I said, you can Google self-employment cash flow analysis to help you out getting the making sure that you're adding back in what you can add in, such as at the very bottom of this, it says note depletion and depreciation may be added back to net profits or loss on qualifying or program guidelines. So this income analysis or this cash flow analysis will help you do that. All right, so let's look at step one. You want to take the net profit and loss amount from the IRS form on the Schedule C. And we're not giving you the form number because sometimes that changes. So, or I mean not the form number, the line number, because the line where the net profit and loss is, you just have to get used to knowing where to go to find it. But once you do, it's a piece of cake. So you want to look for the line that says net profit and loss. It's on the Schedule C. And you're going to do that for 2 years. And you basically just add the two amounts together and divide by 2 to get the average. So for an example, we've got year 1 at $12,000, year 2 at $14,000. When we add those together, we get 26. Divide those by 2, we get an average of $13,000 a year. Does that make sense? Good, good, good. So just know you're pulling the number from the net profit and loss column. All right, now let's practice. Pedro owns a restaurant. He's applying for a loan. Lender requests tax returns for the past 2 years. In 2009, Pedro's net profit and loss was $28,000. In 2010, it increased to $32,000. What is Pedro's annual income according to the lender? I'll give you just a minute to work on that. All right, if you're not done, go ahead and pause it now and finish up and then hit play. All right, so what we want to do is add the 2 years together, 28 and 32 equals 60, and then divide by 2. That gives us $30,000. So what is his gross monthly income? Divide by 12, we get $2,500. Does that make sense? Yeah? All right. Let's move on. Identifying all sources of income. That's going to be very important. And sometimes you got to pull it out of people, especially if they're earning a little something on the side they may not want to tell you. So, you know, make sure you're looking at their bank statements. You're looking at all the deposits. You know, most people have direct deposit, not all. My poor husband, he's been at a company for, I want to say 7 months now because we recently relocated. And they still don't have a direct deposit set up. But you want to make sure if it's not a direct deposit that you know approximately how much the paychecks are. Look for that deposit and see if there are other deposits. That's usually going to be your best red flag. Determine the income calculation method, whether you're going to use net versus gross. And then calculate the annual income from each source. And then just add them all together. And that gives you your total annual income. And there are some case studies that will really help you with this on pages 51 through 53. So go ahead and you can pause this recording and do those now, and then just come back when you're done. All right, welcome back. We are now going to talk about verifying income sources. Verification can involve the use of the following: pay stubs, which is the most common, bank statements, tax returns, W-2s, 1099s, third-party verification. Now, what do I mean by that? You can get a verification of employment from your client's employer, and they'll break down what they've made year-to-date, what their rate of pay is, depending on your verification form. If you use the standard Fannie Mae form, I want to say it can go out to the previous 2 years. And then there's usually a box that says, is this likely to continue? So you can have all that information done on verification of employment, and that's highly recommended. You can also get a verification of public assistance too. You want to review the pay stubs. You're looking for hourly rate or salary amount, and then how many hours worked if it's hourly. Like I said, some employers consider full-time 37 hours, 37 and a half hours, so you want to make sure you're calculating that properly. On the 1099, that's mainly to see, okay, they're an independent contractor, so I need to calculate their income a little differently than I would someone who's getting an hourly rate. And then, of course, the tax returns for business self-employed people. So now we're going to talk about some challenges and barriers to generating income. Name some potential barriers that might prevent a client from earning income. What do you think? This is what we think. Lack of financial literacy and management skills. That's oftentimes the case, especially when it's the first person or first generation person whose family has maybe completed college. This is the first time they've made this much money, and so oftentimes they'll spend it on more wants than needs. And it's just education, that's all it is. Another barrier may be lack of career opportunities. We spoke a little bit about this in Unit 2 with personal resources. They may not have the skills. They may lack access to traditional banking. If they've never banked before, they may also have personal beliefs about traditional banking. And then lack of personal resources, like I just said. So, remember earlier I mentioned the cliff effect? We're about to talk about it. Increased earnings can result in loss of work supports. And what I mean by that are like child care, SNAP benefits, health insurance. So if you got someone who's below poverty, they're getting probably the maximum of work supports. If their income goes up a bit, they could be in jeopardy of losing some of those work supports, which we would all think, and I know definitely our elected officials like to say, well, that's a good thing. We don't need to be helping folks who can help themselves, et cetera, et cetera. What they fail to understand is if someone increases their income by $1 an hour, that $1 an hour may not be enough to cover all the work supports that they've been getting. And so the worker's worse off than before because the new earnings don't pay for the loss of benefits. If they're getting $500 a month worth of benefits, but their income only goes up $100 a month, then now they have the cliff effect. They're going to have a shortfall of $400 a month. So oftentimes workers will refuse opportunities in order to maintain stable. So they won't take the manager's position at the fast food restaurant because it only pays $1.25 more an hour, and they'll lose their health insurance or they'll lose their SNAP benefits. Does that make sense? Structured savings and spending plans can mitigate the cliff effect some, but really the public policy around it needs to change. Here's an example. Sonia, a mother of two, 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, works at a LTC facility as a healthcare aide making $18,000 a year. Fortunately, she owns her own vehicle and has $150 in savings. She pays $300 a month in student loans and credit cards. She receives SNAP, child care subsidies, Section 8, CHIP, EITC. She achieved the CNA, designation or certification, resulting in a promotion with the wage increase to $24,000 a year. So that's a $6,000 difference. So you would think, oh, well, she's making $24,000. She's great. But look at this. At $18,000, her earnings are covering this much of her expenses. And then she's got the federal tax credit, which she used to qualify for, as well as the SNAP and food here. But let's look at $24,000. At $24,000, her expenses actually go up a bit. More than likely, it looks like due to rent and utilities went up, food, so maybe because of her new job, she moved out of maybe an unsavory neighborhood and moved into someplace a little more safe. Child care looks like it went up a bit, but her income doesn't cover all of her expenses. So even though she's getting a federal tax credit, that tax credit only comes once a year. So until she gets her income tax refund, Let's say if she got her raise in February after her taxes were already filed for the previous year, then she's got to wait till next year before she gets that, you see what I'm saying, that tax credit to help offset this shortage. And we know most people use their tax credit to, so one time a year she might be able to take a vacation with the family. She may need to put some money away in case her car breaks down, because she won't have enough money to make a car payment if something should happen. Does that make sense? So that's how that cliff effect works. It seems like, oh, okay, well, you've got enough, but as your income goes up, your expenses tend to go up as well. And here's just another example of that with these two X's. You can see that those are the break-even points. And this is the break-even line. And this lower level here shows the annual income from 0, 6, 12,000, 18,000, 24. So at 18,000, she was above the break-even point because she had resources to cover that. But at 24, you see that drop. That's the cliff effect. You also see it again at 42. There's a drop. So making more money when you've been working and under the poverty level and have been getting assistance, then you've got to make such a huge jump in pay to offset that assistance. It just, like I said, policy needs to change. All right, here's another exercise. Analyze Sonia's situation 3 years later. Single mother, 2 children. Her kids are now 4 and 7. She works in a clinic as a bilingual LVN, making $30,000 a year. Is she better off than she was working as a home health care aide? We want you to explain your answer. And upon completing her RN, should she take the job offered to her by Memorial Hospital, making $42,000? Make sure you give reasons for your answer, and then what are some ways you can assist Sonia to mitigate the cliff effects she's facing with her advancements? So keep this in mind. You want to maybe do a screen print of these 2 screens. This one specifically, I think, is probably going to be more helpful in answering that question. All right? Oops. And here's another resource for you. Self-sufficiency-standard.org. So this kind of lets us know where that break-even point is. And this particular one is for Colorado Springs, El Paso, and Colorado. And for a family of 3, they give you an idea of what typical costs would be for this particular city. Monthly expenses for a family of 3 are about $4,000. Monthly tax credit, $267. So you would need to earn, or your client would need to earn, $21.55 an hour, or $37.92 a month, or $45,504 a year in order to be self-sufficient. And this breaks it down. This is actually in Essex County in Massachusetts, and it actually breaks it down. It's a little different per state how they do it. This one shows a single adult needs to make $11.87 in order to make ends meet, although Massachusetts is quite expensive, so I'm assuming they're finding low-income affordable housing. And then when you get a child, when you have a newborn, look, it more than doubles. You go from $25,080 a year to needing $50,571 just to make ends meet. This isn't prospering. This is just to keep your head above water. It's amazing. It goes down a little bit when they go to preschool because this, I'm assuming, includes child care. Child care gets a little less expensive the older the child is. And then it drops quite a bit, of course, when they're a teenager. Although I beg to differ. If it's a male teenager and they're in sports, it gets quite expensive. But I guess if you don't have the money, you just can't do it, which is unfortunate. All right, that is the end of Unit 3, and we'll be back with Unit 4 in just a bit.